Okay, welcome to section 2 of chapter 8, A New Western Empire. I want you to take a look at all of the subheadings listed here for this section. Notice how they line up with the questions in your notes, which you should have out. Remember that your quiz on Monday will be an open notes quiz over sections 1 and 2. Your objectives for section 2 are that you should be able to give a brief account of the development of the Frankish kingdoms, summarize the development of Charlemagne's empire from its rise to its disintegration. So, we know that Europe is not in a stable position after the fall of the Roman Empire. You have a lot of different small kingdoms being established, people fighting a lot between each other. The Roman Catholic Church has become one of the only stable institutions left in Western Europe. But now a new Western Empire is going to emerge. And that happens because there are several Frankish kingdoms in Gaul, which is now France today, that help temporarily unite the Western Europe. So that's your answer for question Roman numeral 2. Since this is a recording, make sure that you guys are taking advantage of the fact that you can pause and write your notes at your own pace. You can go back if you missed something. Okay, the leader that's kind of responsible for this is Clovis. Clovis becomes the head of his own tribe in northern Gaul, and then he unites many of the Frankish tribes, and he becomes king of all of them by the time he's 15 years old. And it's similar to another great leader that we've talked about before, Genghis Khan, who became leader at the age of 13. Another leader that Clovis is really similar to is Constantine. Clovis is in a battle and he kind of cries out to God for help and promises that he'll get baptized if he makes it through. And he does make it through, so he converts to Christianity, and on top of that he has 3,000 of his soldiers baptized as well. And so after this battle, Clovis becomes a champion or defender of the Catholic Church. If the Pope ever needs assistance, he can come to Clovis. If the Roman Catholic Church needs to be defended from invaders or anything like that, they know they can go to Clovis. And Clovis dies in 511 AD. Okay. So after Clovis dies, his kingdom is divided up between his 4 sons, and they are a part of the establishment of the Merovingian royal house. Sorry. And if you've seen the Da Vinci Code, you know, they talk about Christ's bloodline being in the Merovingian royal household, and that's false, but if you remember that, that's a part of the plot in the movie. Within this royal house, you see a lot of murder and treachery and backstabbing, and there's always somebody trying to get someone off the throne. And usually they're related to each other. And so we also have the establishment of this new role, the mayors of the palace. And the mayors of the palace start off as kind of butlers, almost. They're just in charge of the king's household. And then eventually, these Merovingian kings, because they're not very good kings, they become known as the do-nothing kings. They're drunk often, they're immoral, they're always fighting with one another, they're not really accomplishing much, so who really has the power and who's really making the decisions are the mayors of the palace. So they're making financial decisions, military decisions, all sorts of government administrative decisions. And the first mayor of the palace that you want to know about is Pepin II. He is going to defeat all of the rival mayors of the palace in the different kingdoms. And so he'll reunite the Frankish kingdom under one rule. So he's the first person to do that after Clovis. Then Pepin's son, Charles Martel, he's the most famous of all the mayors of the palace because he helped stop the Muslim advance into Europe at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD. And this is a big deal because if the Muslims would have advanced into Europe, that would have changed all of history. There would have been this great domino effect where Europe wouldn't be, or wouldn't have been, mostly Catholic. It would have been Muslim, and that would have set up the founding of the New World by Muslims instead of Christians. So it's a very pivotal battle in history. Then we have Charles' son, Pepin the Short. Pepin pretty much has had enough of just being the mayor of the palace. He knows that he does all the work. He should also have the title of king. There shouldn't be these kings that don't do any of the work of being king. So Pepin the Short goes to the Pope and he tells the Pope his story, and the Pope sides with Pepin, and so he gives him the title of king. And Pepin will establish the Carolingian household, royal house, because his son will be Charlemagne, and that's where the name Carolingian comes from. But first, before we get to Charlemagne, after the Pope has made Pepin king, he asks Pepin to kind of return the favor and help protect him from this group of barbarians known as the Lombards, who are in northern Italy, but they have been moving into central Italy, kind of getting really close to where the Pope is in Rome. So Pepin goes out there, he defeats the Lombards, and he takes all of the land that he got from the Lombards and he gives it to the Pope. And this is known as the donation of Pepin, this donation of lands to the Pope. And these lands will become known as the Papal States, and you can see them there. They're that like yellow, orangey color. Okay, so after Pepin the Short passes away, he left the empire to his two sons, Charles and Carloman. Carloman ends up passing away, and so now Charles becomes the sole ruler, and he's the greatest Carolingian king. He's the person who's going to see pretty much the Frankish kingdoms come to their peak of power. And he becomes known as Charlemagne, which means Charles the Great. And your textbook divides up their discussion of Charlemagne into 3 sections, and the first is the character of Charlemagne. They describe Charlemagne as being strong and tall and noble. It's interesting that he's tall because his dad was Pepin the Short, but his mother was known as Bigfoot Bertha, pretty much. If you translate her name in French to English, it's Bigfoot Bertha. He also has a lot of issues. He murders prisoners in cold blood. He gets married many, many times. So he's not without sin. Okay, the second section on Charlemagne deals with his conquests. So like I was saying, the Frankish kingdoms reach their peak under Charlemagne. He takes over all of the area that had belonged to the Lombards, so he becomes known as the King of the Lombards. He defeats the Saxons, and he pretty much takes over and lays the foundations for the modern nations that we're going to know today as France, Germany, and Italy. So, Charlemagne has all of this territory, and he needs to find a way to manage it effectively. And we've talked about this before. Excuse me. When we've talked about the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire, and how they needed to divide it up. To manage it better. Okay, so Charlemagne divides up his empire into these hundreds of small administrative districts that will be ruled by counts, and that's where you get the idea of a county. Like we live in Clark County, and that's a small administrative district within the state of Nevada. And then to make sure that there's no shady business going on in these counties, that everybody is following the king's rules, that no one is abusing their power, he he appoints these people known as Nisi Dominici, or the king's envoys, which means messengers. And these guys would go out, they'd go in pairs, because you want to travel in pairs to be safer and to keep each other accountable. And they would investigate the conditions throughout the empire, deliver messages, deliver new laws, just make sure that everyone is doing what they're supposed to be. To make sure that these men couldn't be bribed, the people that were appointed had to be men of proven ability, proven character. When they paired guys up, they wouldn't, they couldn't be a pair for more than 1 year. That way, they couldn't plot anything that would be, they couldn't plot to steal or cheat the king out of anything. And they were not allowed to serve in areas where they themselves owned property, because that could lead them to lie, maybe, or accept a bribe or something like that. Okay, the third section, it doesn't have the 3 there, sorry about that. The third section is Charlemagne's crowning. Charlemagne goes to Rome to attend Mass on Christmas Day in 800 AD, and the Pope crowns Charlemagne there. And this is a big deal because it pretty much sets a precedent for the Pope claiming that he has more power than kings, because he can crown kings. The Pope can decide who's ruler or emperor. Okay, your notes, they are missing the page on a revival of learning. So go ahead and take out another piece of notebook paper, or go to the back side of your notes. I think there's a blank page. If you just close your notes and use the back of them. And I'll go through with you, I'm sorry guys. I'll go through these questions with you. Okay, so the first question you probably want to write in your notes will be something like, why did Charlemagne promote a revival of learning? That would be your subheading question. And the answer to that is that Charlemagne really loved learning. His royal court then becomes the center of learning. And you might think, like, oh, Charlemagne, from the Frankish tribes, he's going to be in France, but nope, he's in Germany. His leading scholar that he brings to his court, who actually teaches him, who's like the tutor for him and his kids and all the nobles, is Alcuin. Alcuin is actually from England. And it might, really sorry, it might be Alcuin who pretty much helps, kind of sparks this interest that Charlemagne is going to have, and in making sure that the clergy is well educated. So that might be a question you want to say, something like, why did Charlemagne want a better educated clergy? And the answer for that is he wants his clergy to know how to read, so that they can read the scriptures and understand them better. He wants them to be educated so that they have more wisdom regarding the scriptures. And then another question, finally on this slide, that actually there are probably 2 more questions, sorry, that you're going to want to ask are, what were the most important contributions to education during his reign? And that would be that people were interested in the Bible. There's a renewed interest in the classics and ancient literature. And it's not everyone. Obviously, peasants aren't learning to read because of Charlemagne. But the clergy is more interested, and the nobles are more interested in preserving Bibles and preserving ancient texts. Since the fall of the Roman Empire, we've been cut off from Egyptian trade, which is where we were getting our papyrus, so our paper. And we've had to start writing on parchment. So when people are writing on parchment, it's much more expensive, and so they're trying to write really, really tiny, and so a lot of it is hard to read. So when we have this renewal of interest in copying these texts, because back then they didn't have printing press yet, you had to hand copy all of these things. They develop a new style of handwriting, so that could be one of your questions. What is Carolingian minuscule? It's this new kind of handwriting that they're going to use to copy all these texts, and you have an example of it there. And we get a lot of what is our lowercase alphabet from this text, from this type of writing. finally, now we've seen the rise of Charlemagne's empire. Now we're going to see the disintegration of Charlemagne's empire. And it comes from problems from within and problems from without. So the first subheading is problems from within. After Charlemagne dies, his empire gets passed to his son, and then after his son dies, it gets passed on to his grandsons, and there's all of this fighting between his grandsons for, you know, who's going to be the emperor and who gets this part of the kingdom. And finally, there's peace. They come to an agreement, they negotiate, and they come to a compromise known as the Treaty of Verdun. And they agree to split the empire into 3 kingdoms. So Charles the Bald will get West Franklin, which you see there is West Frankish Kingdom. Louis the German will get East Franklin. And then Lothaire will get to keep the title of emperor, and he rules the land between both of his brothers' kingdoms. But then, as these men have children, and those children want pieces of the kingdom, it just continues to disintegrate. If you look in your textbooks on page 190 and 191, it'll tell you that the people start to really not respect their rulers, and you can tell that from some of the names that they give them, like Louis the Stammerer, Charles the Fat, Louis the Child, Charles the Simple. So there's not a lot of respect from the people, which means the people aren't really going to go fight for these kings or emperors. And so that's a major problem and a reason why Charlemagne's empire is going to pretty much vanish. Okay, so then we have problems from without. So not only is there all this infighting, but there's foreign invaders coming from all sides, putting pressure on the Carolingian Empire. So you have Muslims coming from Africa, pretty much along the Mediterranean coast, causing problems. You have different Asiatic nomadic groups and Hungarians going into the Danube area and causing problems there. And then you have the Vikings, which, interestingly enough, Charlemagne pretty much set that one up himself. He got rid of all of the Vikings' enemies, and now the Vikings don't have any enemies to worry about, so now they can come into Charlemagne's empire and cause problems for the Carolingians. So that's your whole section 2. Here's your paragraph shrink, establish, empire, and problems. So this would be a good time to probably pause and go ahead and write your summary. Make sure that your summary makes sense, that it is showing me that you learned something from this section. It's reviewing information from this section. It's not just making a sentence. Okay. Here's your SRQ and answers. So what man united the Frankish tribes and became known as king of the Franks? That's Clovis. What palace official became the real power behind the throne? It's the mayor of the palace. At what battle in what year did Charles Martel defeat the Muslims? And that's at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD. Under whose rule did the Frankish Empire reach its peak? Charlemagne. And then name the treaty that split the Carolingian Empire into 3 parts and identify the brothers and the portion of the kingdom which they received. That treaty is the Treaty of Verdun. Charles the Bald got West Franklin, Louis the German got East Franklin, and Lothaire got the land between. Okay, remember to review your vocab and your notes for sections 1 and 2. You're going to have an open notes quiz on Monday. Have a good weekend.